All right, this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville is resuming after a brief recess. And the next item before us is a presentation from our senior planner, Mr. Thun, on the public meeting report for the zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision, Lower Fourth Development Limited and Pendant Development Limited. And we have no registered delegations on this, but I will, as always, poll the audience in case there are any. Mr. Thun, council and the public look forward to your summary of the matter before us.
Thank you, Mayor Burton and members of council. As mentioned, it is a zoning bylaw amendment and a draft plan of subdivision application submitted for the fourth phase of Mattamy Preserve lands in North Oakville. It does represent the redevelopment of 43 hectares of land. The report can be found on page 63 of tonight's agenda. And as you had mentioned right at the beginning of the meeting, the purpose of tonight's meeting or on this application is to introduce the application to council and the members of the public and the members of the public that are on YouTube, and to obtain any further comments related to the application. And those comments would be addressed in a further recommendation report in the future. The slide before council shows or identifies the site and its context with the surrounding area. The subject lands that I mentioned is 43 hectares in size. It's located east of Niagawa, which is on the left-hand side of the screen, and west of 6th Line, which is on the right-hand side of the screen, and it's midway between Dundas Street at the bottom end of the slide and Burnham Thorpe Road. The surrounding uses for this portion of the Mattamy Preserve lands are principally agricultural lands. They are vacant. The southerly portion of the property, as you will see in the draft plan of subdivision coming up on the next slide, is related to core number 5, which was established through the North Oakville Creek's subwatershed study. And then further south, as you can see by the Carting Mill and Preserve Drive, that is phase 3 of development for the Mattamy Preserve lands. So the proposal itself before council on this slide, it does represent the redevelopment, as I said, of 43 hectares for 390 dwellings, of which 368 are detached and 22 freehold townhouses, and those freehold townhouses are in the upper right-hand corner on Preserve Drive in this area right here. It also reflects a partial school block, block 373 in this location, and it is a partial school block that would have to be added on to the lands to the north when that draft plan of subdivision comes in. There are also 2 natural heritage system blocks, blocks 378 and 379. They equate to approximately 47% of the draft plan of subdivision, and they go well on the way of creating the core 5 as established through the subwatershed study and the secondary plan. And those lands would be conveyed to the municipality at the end of the day. Access to the site would be through Carting Mill, which is the road to the left-hand side of the screen, and Preserve Drive, which is on the right-hand side of the screen. They are coming from the 3rd phase and ultimately from Dundas Street. A public meeting a public open house was held on this property July 22nd at Town Hall. As evidenced in the planning justification report, 2 members of the public were in attendance and no concerns were raised. Okay, my screen. Having a little bit of difficulty here, Your Worship, on the next slide. Yep. I'll continue on, Your Worship, while the technical matter gets addressed. These lands are contained within the North Oakville East Secondary Plan. That secondary plan was established in 2008 with that approval. The subject lands are designated neighborhood area, natural heritage system area, and elementary school. The North Oakville East Secondary Plan sets out the long-term vision for the development of all of the North Oakville lands north of Dundas Street. Extensive efforts were undertaken between the late 1990s and the approval in February of 2008, particularly with regards to the natural heritage system. The natural heritage system, as some members of council can remember, is at the end of the day with the North Oakville East and the North Oakville West secondary plans will equate to 900 net hectares of the 3,100 hectares of land for North Oakville total. Okay, so you're looking at over 30%. From a zoning bylaw perspective, the subject lands are designated or zoned existing development. So that is only allows for what's legally existing on the subject lands today. The proposal before submitted by Mattamy is to amend the zoning map as you, well, if I had the slide, you'd be able to see their zoning amendment. But is to amend map 12.4 of the bylaw, of the North Oakville bylaw, and also to amend section 8 of the North Oakville zoning bylaw to include special provisions related to this proposal itself. And for council's information, the zoning bylaw is included within the staff report, and the numbers that are reflected are existing special provisions that are already contained within the North Oakville zoning bylaw. As normal, we do address or have a slide on matters to be addressed. That is contained within the staff report on page 12. Appendix C also contains a public comment from the date of writing the report. Council, I believe, does have an additional comment dated February 25th from, I believe it's a resident of North Oakville, but it could be not North Oakville, but suffice to say, I will address those comments as part of the future recommendation report. And I will actually reach out to this gentleman and have a meeting with him to address the comments because I believe they are more than just site specific, they are more general. These comments, together with the comments that are raised tonight, will be part of that future public report. So in conclusion, Your Worship, the recommendation 1, 2, and 3 are contained within the staff report for council's consideration. As mentioned, any additional comments will be included in that future report, and we will return at a later date once those comments and conditions have been addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thun.
Does it work now?
And council, do you have comments or issues to be added? Let me start with Councillor Adams, and I'll just go down here, and then I'll come back this way.
Thank you very much for the report and the presentation. I just had one issue that I wanted to raise, which is on this map, in fact, that you've got in front of us, the road network that's at the northerly end of it, where there's a number of crescents, is inconsistent with the North Oakville master plan concept where we had a grid pattern of streets where they've modified the grid and now we have crescents instead. And I'd like to know if that's appropriately considered and if it's consistent with good planning process for the transportation network.
The master, through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Adams, the master plan was back in 2008 one way of devising how the subdivisions would look and how development would occur in North Oakville. The aspect of grid patterns is still an issue or a principle that we want to espouse through our development. We will look at that through this application again. Urban design comments relate to the grid pattern, modified grid pattern. So we will look at that, but keep in mind that the master plan is only one way of dealing with development. It is not the only way. So it is an appendix to the secondary plan, and it can be modified, provided the principles are still being maintained.
Thank you for that. So I'd like to know that it is in fact appropriate, because I'm concerned that we're losing the grid pattern and we're not replacing it with any kind of pedestrian features to make up for it. And so there's a lack of pedestrian nature to the neighborhood that's resulting.
I will take that as a comment to review.
Thank you.
Councillor Listiana. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your report. Just building on Councillor Adams' comment, that's my concern as well. I'm wondering if we can look at the opportunity of opening up any other of those roads, because Carding Mill and Preserve are already used quite heavily in the subdivision as exit roads onto Dundas, well, towards Dundas. So I think it would be helpful if we could look at the opportunity to open up some more access to that neighborhood so that we're not overcrowding the roads that are already overcrowded, especially because I believe it's close to a school site as well, the school site as well. So if we could please look into that. And I guess I'm kind of interested in knowing what else will be covered under the transportation impact study. It's one of the points that is on your list of issues to look at.
From the transportation impact perspective, through you, your worship, an overall neighborhoods 9, 10, and 11 transportation impact study was generated by all the developers within those communities. Those that has to set the guidance with regards to intersection locations, width of roads, capacities and whatnot, and ensuring that the development as originally envisioned still can be maintained. With regards to your comment related to opening up more roads, Carding Mill and Preserve Drive are major roads. There is another road, if once we can get this this slide. Okay, Street B. Street B will go to 6 Line.
Oh,
Okay, so those are 2 subdivisions that are presently in for review.
Okay.
So if you look at on the right-hand side, 6 Line is going to be pretty close to the limits of where the line is for the slide itself. So Street B will extend all the way to 6 Line. To the north, there will be another street on the north side of the school and the park that is shown there. It's a little grayed out,
Yeah.
but those will also go. So the larger grid pattern is still being maintained. Carding Mill will go up to Burnham Thorpe Road, and Preserve Drive will go up to Burnham Thorpe Road. And then the road to the north of the future park will also go towards Neagawa Boulevard.
Okay. Sorry, it's just a little bit hard to see. So
It is.
There's 2 streets that are going to 6 Line then?
There will be 2 streets. Okay. So on this slide, you will see this road going to 6 Line, and you will see this road going to 6 Line. And similarly, this road here to the north will go to Neagawa Boulevard. And those are the major grid pattern as you see on the secondary plan, figure NOE 2 to the left. So those 2 roads right there. So that would be Street B, which would go to 6 Line. That is the northerly road going to 6 Line. This is Carding Mill, and this is Preserve. So
Okay.
those major road systems are being maintained, and the grid pattern is being maintained.
Thank you.
Councillor Sanju.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just layering on top of that. So we do understand, living in that sub, that North Park is also one of our major transit corridors. Do we have any indication that North Park is also going to open up to 6 Line anytime soon, with this or without this?
It will eventually when development does occur for the last phase of the Trinison subdivision.
Okay, so the area so if I'm looking at, sorry, I'm just going to look at the
So if
agenda,
you're-
page 67.
So if you're looking right here,
Yes,
that right there will connect up to 6 Line, right there, and will go all the way to Neagawa. That road there already exists and goes between Neagawa and 6 Line.
60-mile drive.
Yep.
Okay. Do we have a timeline on that?
I'm sorry?
Do we have a timeline on that?
I have no timeline on that.
Okay. That's all I need for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Over here, Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just out of curiosity, when we talk about complete communities, where does this community go for a loaf of bread or a bag of milk?
What was envisioned is the neighborhood center areas would provide a bit of mixed use, so it's walkable. Right now, the shopping plaza at Neagawa and Dundas Street is the local grocery store.
Okay, so they've got to go down to Dundas in order to get access to anything
Yes.
there. Okay, thank you, Your Worship.
And coming along next, Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, looking at this development, and I know that we talk about the grid pattern, just got to add to that is that part of the benefit was to look at walkable and with small parkettes and so forth. I don't see anything in this development for that? There's 390 units, and I don't see any green space except for that one block in the top right-hand corner for the school. Is there consideration for that?
The park to the north and the school were envisioned by the secondary plan. There is a vista right in this location right here. It's approximately, I believe it's 6 meters wide or 9 meters wide. Strictly coming directly south from that road will connect up to the Natural Heritage System. The Natural Heritage System does have pathways through it, so the pedestrian connections would still be there. The roads do have the sidewalks. These are all going to be connected. Street E, as you see right now, would be connected to the back end of the public elementary school.
I guess my question is with respect to the development itself within the center part of it, or where young families can walk, if there's, is there ability to put in a structure, a splash pad, or that type of thing for the community?
When it comes to the parkland associated with North Oakville, there's a hierarchy. There's the community centers, there's the neighborhood parks, and there's the village squares. The neighborhood park for this area would be just to the north of this property.
Thank you.
Madam CAO.
I would just add too that when the North Oakville Secondary Plan was prepared, there was a full assessment of all Parks and Recs facilities that would need to be accommodated. And so the sizes of the parks and the distribution of those facilities was all part of that overall plan. So it wasn't just the parkland, as Mr. Thun has said, it was also the facility and the programming
Yes.
that was within that.
Thank you. Back over here to Councillor Sanju.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just layering on top of Councilor Romero's question about a walk-to community and things being accessible. I live just south of this area, and there's no grocery store for us to walk to. It takes like half an hour to walk to Fortino's from where we are. So if these people are walking the same place, it's going to be 45 minutes to an hour for them to walk.
Mr. Thun, you have a little sketch in the upper left corner
Yes.
of this. Do you want to explain how this all fits together into the so-called, the 14 or 15? This is part, as I understand it, this is part of one of the 14 or 15 neighborhood centers of North Oakville. Can you, maybe, some of
Yes.
the members of council might not be familiar with the Northeast Oakville Secondary Plan?
Sure. Through you, Your Worship, to council. The North Oakville East Secondary Plan has 14 communities. The 14th community, just quickly, is west of 16 Mile Creek. It's the only community to the west. So that is made up of the Graydon Banning, Martelac, and the CHWO lands. So the 13 communities, the remaining 13 communities are basically east of 16 Mile. Communities 1, 2, and 3 are basically between Neagawa and Trafalgar Road. Okay, the drawing in the top right-hand or top left-hand corner is from their draft plan, so it was more of a cut and paste into that. It shows the various phases that have occurred through their preserved land. So this location right here is their first phase, or their second phase, I should say. This is the first phase. The hatch mark here is their third. So you'll see down at the bottom on the draft plan of subdivision, you will see phase 1 that's registered as 20M1139. You will see phase 2 is registered as 20M1160, and phase 3, which is just south of Core 5, as 1198. Those are all within communities 2, for the most part, 1 and 2. Okay. The rest of the communities, like 1 to 5, is on the north side of Dundas Street. As you work your way north, basically 6 to 12 are on the south side of Burnhamthorpe Road, and then you have the employment lands in the transition area to the north. So the progression that's happening right now, this is in neighborhood 10. So that is within the second phase of development for North Oakville. We are getting close to the 75% factor. We're almost there to allow us to actually get into the North Oakville Phase 2 lands, and then development will occur in that area. Part of the information required on this is also the servicing allocation, which is the subject of another report tonight.
Councillor Palmer?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, just to confirm then, so in the top right corner, I see public elementary school, and then right north of that,
Yep.
that's the park?
I'm sorry,
There will be a
this
park
is
there?
a portion of the public elementary school. This would have to be added as part of the subdivision to the north to create one complete elementary school site.
Okay,
And the neighborhood park for this community, community number 10, would be this neighborhood park right here where my
Okay.
cursor is.
okay. Any parkettes in the community, or is it
There
just?
are no parkettes in here. There is the small vista, which would be dealt with as a connection to the natural heritage system. But there are no village squares, there's no other neighborhood parks, there's no community park as part of this draft plan of subdivision.
Okay, thank you.
Any other issues to add to the list or ask about? Mr. Planning Director, do you have have you collected a list to add?
Through your worship to the council. So we're looking at road patterns are inconsistent with the master plan, resulting in crescents as opposed to a grid pattern. Does this represent good planning? It results in a lack of pedestrian facilities. Consider opportunities to open up more access roads than just the two major roads. Provide information as to how and when the larger road pattern will be achieved. So phasing and timing, I think, is what you're looking for there. Is there enough green space within this plan to support this development? That's what I got.
Anything else? Councillor Hazzateel.
Is it possible to get a walkability score on these proposals?
Through your worship, walkability scores are related to more real estate.
At the end of the day, somebody has to live there. Somebody wants to know how far they have to go to get to something. We live with the legacy of what gets approved, and I think understanding what we envision from a planning perspective, how walkable it would be, given that we've all also said we have a climate emergency, seems to be an appropriate thing to add.
Councillor Palmer.
I agree with Councillor Hazlett's remarks, and also if you could please add to the list the timeline of the park. And the reason I say that is because the community that we have just behind King's Collegiate, that entire community, they don't have a walk-to park. And, you know, it's a big issue for them because as Councillor Sandu alluded to earlier, we have a lot of young families in our area. So the park is definitely something that I would be interested in knowing the timelines on. Thank you.
Councillor Elgar.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. Thanks for the presentation, Rob. Rob, if I look at the density I'm trying to figure out here, so it's 43.4 hectares, but scratch out the 20.5, which is all NHS. What are we looking to put in here from a density? How many people you're expecting in this particular application? Since everything is driven based on a forecasted population and on a per hectare basis of where you can actually plant a house instead of the NHS.
Through you, your worship. When you look at the development itself, there's a range of single detached homes ranging from 10.4 to 15.25. They are, like I said, there's 368 of those. There's a combination of the suburban designation, the general urban designation, and the neighborhood center. So each of those has a different density range. To give you an example, the suburban has a density range between 25 and 75. So that is totally different than the South Oakville densities that were reviewed in the previous application. So there's a wide range of what is permitted through that. So to give you an answer what the actual density is, I'll do that as part of the recommendation report.
Okay, because we're putting 390 units on 12.9 hectares, correct?
Mhm.
And if there's basically, what do you figure, around 3 people per unit, average? in Oakville right now?
Give or take.
Give or take a bit, so over 1,000 people are going in this small section.
When the secondary plan was created, each of the communities was envisioned to achieve the 55,000 people for North Oakville, roughly 3,000 per community.
Right. And this is part of a community, and this is 1,000
This
in
is part of
section.
neighborhood 10, so it is not just this part, it is lands to the north and slightly to the west.
So this little piece of property for the school, half a hectare or whatever it happens to be, when will the kids be able to get to their school, walk to their school?
Well, we have to, the lands to the north have to be amalgamated with this parcel of land to basically create a viable building block to start out with. So a time frame, I can't give you that time frame because I need also to know when the draft plan and subdivision to the north is coming in.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Rob.
Councillor Liszczyna.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Thun, could you just remind me what's allowed in the heritage system? Just a trail for a bike and walking? Is that the?
That, through you, Your Worship, that is it. There's no structural development proposed in the natural heritage system.
So even though this looks like it's all this green space, there is nothing else available for kids, rather just a walkway?
Well, core number 5 is made up of, through you, Your Worship, wooded areas, wetlands, agricultural fields, and the buffers associated with those. So there are features in there that need to be protected at the same time. So we're trying to be very cognizant of the fact of where we put our walkway trails and where the grading gets undertaken to create those walkway trails. Because it's not only just the block itself, it's the individual features within the block that we're trying to protect at the same time.
So, but would there be a continuous trail through there if you wanted
There
to
is a-
take the kids for a bike ride?
There is a trail system, yes. On the south
But
side,
through
there
this
is one
section?
already,
So through this section?
yes. There is a North Oakville Trails master plan that was created for just this fact of creating a pedestrian connectivity.
All right. Okay, Mr. Planning Director, could we, in the recommendation report, take some care to show the context in which this piece will fit when we are at build-out, so that the neighborhood communities of the secondary plan, everyone has it in front of them to remind them of how it all fits together. So would someone like to move the indicated motion? Oh, wait, I'm sorry, we have a delegation. Yes, sir. Please come up, introduce yourself, and add your issues to our list.
Your Worship, councilors. My name is Michael Smith. My wife and I moved to Charles Fay Passage in this area. And I have a big concern with the environment and green space. And Councillor, thank you very much for talking about heritage. And Sean O'Meara, thank you very much for talking about getting a bag of milk. Every morning I go for a walk with my dog, and I spend 15, 20 minutes picking up garbage that the developers have left with no care with the environment. That is my biggest concern is, and I'm going to talk about the green space in a minute, there's clearly, in my mind, no care for the environment. In our mission statement, we state, ensuring environmental sustainability, I'm quoting some of your stuff, minimize the town's ecological footprint, preserve town's environmental resources, natural heritage systems. I'm very concerned that we're not following through in our strategic plan. I'm very concerned about our future. I'm a long-term resident of Oakville, been here for over 20 years, see my kids grow up here. And I just don't seem to think that anybody cares about the long-term sustainability of Oakville. I think it has to do with density, as Mr. Elger talked about. I think there's a big issue there. There's no parks being planned here. There's a road going through the green space, which I have no idea how that happened. How do you build a road through green space and it's allowed? And this is gonna have to be a big road. And I can tell you when I walk my dog through there in the mornings, I've got to watch out for the trucks not to get hit every morning. okay? So I don't understand how we can have a road through green space to begin with, and I have a real issue with the environmental concerns. I'd like to understand how we're going to deal with, first of all, the garbage in our area, but if they're going to develop this area, are we going to make sure that the developers are going to manage the properties properly and care about the environment? Those are my concerns.
Thank you very much for bringing us those.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Planning Director, what's your list?
Through your worship. So the road pattern is inconsistent with the master plan, resulting in crescents as opposed to a grid pattern. Does this represent good planning, resulting in lack of pedestrian facilities? Consider opportunities to open up more access roads than just the two major roads. Provide information as to how and when the larger road pattern will be achieved. Think in terms of timing, phasing, that type of thing. Is there enough green space within this plan to support this development and the timelines of the parks? Can we get a walkability score on this? What is the net density of this application? Take some care to show the context of this proposal, specifically parks, road connections, pedestrian facilities. In other words, how does this fit into the whole?
And could we add, on Mr. Smith's behalf, an explanation of how the road patterning was created in the elaborate to-do that went on for years over the Northeast Oakville secondary plan? It's a fraught process involving the old OMB and many a tale to be told. Would one of the councillors from Ward 7 like to move this? Councillor Sanju, thank you. May I put the vote? All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you, everybody. The next is the public meeting and recommendation. Oh, you know what? We need a motion to go past the hour, I believe. Councillor Knoll, all those in favor? I think that carries. Thank you. If we give our attention to Lee Musson, our senior planner, she will present the recommendation report on the Joshua Creek 1429 Dundas Street East bylaw proposal.
Good evening, Mayor Burton, members of council. This evening, you'll find my staff report on page 91 of your agenda. Madam has proposed a revision to the draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw related to the lands which were approved by the local planning tribunal in February of 2019. The purpose of the zoning bylaw application is to reconfigure the existing zoning boundaries in the vicinity of a village square within the Mattamy Joshua Creek subdivision, also known as Bressa. This report has been prepared as a combined statutory public meeting and recommendation meeting report, given the minor revision to the draft plan of subdivision, and that the lands affected by the rezoning are located centrally within a larger subdivision, not in close proximity to any existing residential uses. The subject property is located on the north side of Dundas Street, west of 9th Line. The larger landholding is municipally known as 1429 Dundas Street East. The lands affected by the application is located centrally within the subdivision, again, away from any existing residential uses, and is shown in hatch on the slide in front of you. In terms of some background, in 2019, the LPAT approved the Bressa subdivision and the zoning bylaw 2018-036. The draft plan of subdivision consisted of a total of 226 residential units, including a village square, 2 stormwater management ponds, a natural heritage system, and 2 Dundas urban core blocks, which will be developed for a mix of uses. The LPAT approved the draft plan included a village square, again to be located centrally in the plan, with townhouses and single detached dwellings proposed in close proximity. The slide before you this evening on the left side shows what the LPAT approved, and then on the right side will show the proposed red line revision to the draft plan. The applicant has advised planning staff that their intended townhouse layout could not be accommodated on the subject lots in a suitable manner in accordance with the approved zoning bylaw. As a result, the applicant is proposing to eliminate 2 townhouse blocks and reconfigure the village square. The proposed village square, which is proposed to be 0.4 hectares in size, is narrower than previously approved and oriented more in a north-south direction. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment application was submitted, which would have the effect of reconfiguring the existing zoning boundaries in the vicinity of the village square. The applicant has also submitted a corresponding red line revision to the draft plan of subdivision that would be approved by the Director of Planning following the expiration of the 20-day appeal period related to this current zoning application. The effect of the proposed revision to the draft plan of subdivision would be to modify the configuration of the village square and a portion of the adjacent lots. The proposed revision would result in a reduction of 18 townhouse units and the introduction of 8 single detached dwelling units, giving an overall loss of 8 residential units over the larger subdivision. In terms of the North Oakville East Secondary Plan, the lands are designated as village square and neighborhood area. The LPAT approved draft plan of subdivision included a 0.41 hectare village square. The proposed revision to the draft plan of subdivision has in fact reduced the size of the village square to 0.40 hectares in size. The land use policies state that village squares should be approximately 0.3 hectares in size, but may be larger or smaller, depending on the location and the facilities accommodated. The applicant has provided a concept plan to demonstrate that facilities planned for this village square can still be accommodated. The concept plan was reviewed by Parks and Open Space staff, and they support the size and reconfiguration of the village square. The application is considered to be a minor revision to the LPAT approved draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw, and an appropriate and compatible development north of Dundas Street, which conforms to the policies of the Northeast Oakville Secondary Plan. In terms of the zoning bylaw, the subject lands affected by this application are Zone P, Park, GU, General Urban, subject to Special Provision 54, and S, Suburban, subject to Special Provision 55. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment would have the effect of extending the park zone onto lands formerly zoned suburban and general urban, remove the park zone on lands east of the village square and replace it with suburban, and some minor adjustments to the zone categories on the north side of Street B for consistency. The planning department has undertaken a circulation of the application to ensure that all technical and financial matters have been satisfactorily addressed. In staff's opinion, the zoning bylaw amendment is appropriate and continues to conform to the Northeast Oakville Secondary Plan, does not conflict with provincial policy statement and growth plan, and conforms to the regional official plan. It is recommended that bylaw 2020-018 be approved as a minor revision to the LPAT approval and draft plan of subdivision zoning bylaw. In conclusion, staff put forth the following recommendations for council's consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Musson. Are there questions for Ms. Musson? Are there members of the public with information for council on this file? Seeing none, Councillor Adams?
Happy to make the recommendation of staff.
Thank you, Councillor. May I put the vote? All in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is approved. The next item is the discussion item, the scenic corridor study, and we have a presentation from the manager of urban design, Ms. Christine Tizard. Ms. Tizard, we look forward to your presentation.
Okay. This is a really...
Councillor Duddick?
Your worship, in order to facilitate, I don't know if others have any questions or have a need to see it. The residents who've been quite instrumental and quite involved throughout this process are extremely pleased with the findings of staff, and I'd be pleased to move it, but I just wanted to give you that heads up.
Does any member of council need the presentation in addition to the complete report that you all have read? Ms. Tizard, you're off the hook. Thank you. Excuse me?
Just a comment, your worship, in the study of this, I am so happy that we've moved forward on the scenic corridor study with respect to Fogger and Lakeshore. It really will assist in the EAs and also the development of Lakeshore in the future development. So thank you very much. It's a good start on this scenic tour study. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Anybody else? If not, may I put the vote? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you, everybody. Council, I would like to ask if you want to go into camera to consider confidential discussion item C1. Pleased to move it? All right. It's moved by Councillor Duddick. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. That brings us to the Halton Region 2020 Allocation Program item. And we have a presentation from Gabe Charles, our Senior Manager, and we have registered delegations from 2 individuals.
Just one sec, Mr. Mayor. All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So by way of a little bit of background, for those councillors who have not had some of the opportunity at the local level perhaps to understand what the region's allocation program is, I can give a quick overview in terms of where we are. And this stems from a meeting that Regional Council held back in November of 2019, wherein they had said to the local municipalities to understand how all the allocation was going to get distributed across Halton Region. The locals needed to provide a recommendation to the region in terms of how that would be distributed. In terms of what the allocation is, the allocation program is, it's the way that Halton Region looks at advancing the infrastructure throughout the region based on the developers prepaying the hard service component of the development charge. And so that covers things such as the roads, the water, like the regional roads, water, sanitary trunk lines, pumping stations, that sort of thing. So in order to determine how much allocation is needed, what the region does is they use their best plan estimates from 2006, and they forecast what is the amount of population through a given time period. They disaggregate that through some the ratios that they use for what they call a single detached equivalent. So how much would a single detached house use from a servicing perspective? And then they use that to derive how many SDEs they will need in order to accomplish their infrastructure program, so that capital program moving forward. In this case, what the region has looked at is from the previous program, which was from 2012 to 2016. The next program was to commence in 2016. It's been delayed a little bit. It was to go to 2022. And so the other 3 municipalities, Burlington, Milton, and Halton Hills, are looking through the 2022 forecast. And in this case, they said to Oakville, given the amount of interest that there was in the program, to go through the 2031 population forecast. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail, but at this point, we're not as concerned with using that 2031 forecast. So what I can walk you through is the amount of interest that was generated in Oakville, which was the 13,436 single detached equivalents. To break that down, that was 5,800, almost 5,900 of a standard SDE is what they call it, 6,700 for high density SDEs, 861 in purpose-built rental. A standard SDE, what the region has is by entering into these agreements with the various landowners, there's different payment schedules that are available. The standard SDEs, what that means is you're applying for a single detached or townhouse or apartment unit, and you can move those SDEs amongst the different unit types. With a high density SDE, that's a different payment schedule, which means that you can't transfer those, you can't buy high-density SDE and use it for low density. You can only use it for high density. And then there's a separate one for purpose-built rental as well. So how that broke down across all of North Oakville was 1,965 SDEs were requested in the North Oakville West Secondary Plan, and the balance were in the East Plan. And so altogether, what the region said in terms of the 2031 population forecast was that equated to 7,118 SDEs that the town then has to find a way to distribute that amongst the interested landowners. So this map just gives you an idea of those landowners who had interest in this program. The parcel shown is, in fact, that is the boundary of the parcel. It doesn't net out the NHS or the roads or storm ponds or things like that. And this red line, everything south of that is what is within a registered plan or permits have been issued. People are living in those communities. So to really break it down in terms of how we are going to look at what is in effect double the interest for what we can allocate was to go through a number of evaluation criteria. And these criteria are ones that council would have seen in previous programs, very similar to ones that would have been seen before. So foremost amongst that is compliance with our OP objectives and policies. So the growth in North Oakville that the allocation program supports has already been approved in the sense that we have an existing secondary plan which has residential permissions in it. So when the region allocates the program, it's into the greenfield areas only. So only those areas north of Dundas, for example, because everything south will say, for the most part, within our built boundary. By virtue of that, the exercise now is to ensure that what we're doing is allocating to those lands which are already approved, which already have permissions for residential purposes. We also have heard from council previously that there's a desire to advance the higher density forms of development as soon as possible. That should be there earlier on in the planning process. And that does help support the urban structure in terms of the centers and the corridors, et cetera. And that is something that we're conscientious of in terms of advancing. The challenge that we have is ensuring that there's a balance between how much we can advance from a high density perspective while still ensuring that we have sufficient infrastructure in the subdivisions themselves, which are those where we get our school sites, our park sites, et cetera. There's also ensuring that if we advance too much of the high density now, our caution is that we don't want landowners to be sitting on that allocation and not advancing it. And by the same token, there's only so much within the market that can be absorbed with apartment units themselves. So it's trying to find a balance between the higher density forms as well as the neighborhoods themselves. Because in essence, and as we've heard it this evening, we want to ensure that those neighborhoods are complete. So that's not just making sure we've got the parks in there and the school sites, but also that we have the right mix of retail, that we have employment opportunities through those as well. We want to make sure that we're coordinating the infrastructure between local and regional infrastructure. There's in cases where we may need swim ponds, stormwater management ponds to support other subdivisions. So making sure that those are, in place. As I mentioned, advancing the schools and the parks and local transit. And this is one of the things that we are very cognizant of. We've heard that from council here. We've heard it at regional council as well. There's constraints not just in Oakville, but in Milton as well, in terms of getting the school sites moving. We want to make sure that the operational costs are manageable for the town, that any planning act approvals or development applications, that comes into play as well. And we want to ensure that the landowners that we're allocating towards are members of NOCB. And in essence, they have signed on to the landowners agreement, the cost sharing, et cetera, which is part of also looking at the master parkland agreement. So to remind council, this is the North Oakville East secondary. This is the extract from the secondary plan. As Mr. Thun had identified, this is the master plan as an appendix to the plan. It offers that finer grain detail in terms of how to take the land use schedule and how to put a little bit more meat on the bones, so to speak, in terms of where the roads go, how the parks and the school sites get laid out, where the village squares are going to be, et cetera. So through the exercise that we've had over the last several years, we've been able to open up 4 school sites. Starting from the far left, the public board, open occupied, St. Gregory's, open, occupied, and the Catholic Board. We have the next school over at Post Road, which is under construction currently, will be open this September. And then we have on the far right, on the east of Trafalgar, we have another site available for the Catholic Board, which was done through the Minto and the Shield Bay subdivisions. When we looked at the amount of allocation that the region gave us in terms of 7118, the reason there was benefit to that and using that higher number was because that was one way that we could ensure that we were getting a fair amount of flexibility to open up the additional school sites that we've heard council has been looking for. So through this program, there's the potential that we can open up 5 additional school sites, or at least facilitate having those sites available for the boards. And they have identified to us which ones are their priorities going forward, and those are east of Trafalgar right now to get caught up. And then their secondary priorities would be just south of Burnhamthorpe. So in a little bit more detail in terms of those sites that we would recommend, the red are ones where we are suggesting that we would not be allocating at this time. Yellow, there's a partial allocation, so upwards of almost 98% in some cases, and the green would be the full allocation request. The challenge that we've had with looking at Palermo is there's a lot of benefit to allocating towards Palermo right now, not the least of which is being able to work with the region to help to accelerate the servicing for this area, for the employment lands. There's private landowner interest as well because they're on septics and wells, and there's a lot of benefit to getting those sites on into urban services. The challenge that we have right now is we have not yet had the opportunity to bring to council a final recommendation in terms of that overall policy framework. Council has seen the Palermo growth area review that back in September, I think, and that we only took that out to the public as a public information meeting in November. So at this point, we're still working through a lot of the details for Palermo. It's not to say we're not going to recommend in the future. It just means that there's some additional work that we should be getting done right now. We'll be able to bring that to council in the coming months and then continue to work with the region to get the servicing advanced for Palermo. In the East Plan, this illustrates the breakdown of what we're recommending to council in terms of the allocation. As I said, in green would be 100%, yellow would be a partial, and those in red would not be receiving allocation at this time. That said, there's opportunities that should the ones that are in red want to move forward, we're able to look at the technical studies outside of an application because there's some benefit in terms of coordinating how those sites are going to work into the future. We look at things like the environmental work, the infrastructure, the transportation work. So there's some synergies in terms of being able to look at them. It's just right now, because the allocation amount that we have is limited, this was the way that we were recommending advancing those right now. Now, as I was saying, in terms of being able to look at the school sites that are shown in this little blue flag, by allocating the way that we are recommending right now, we'll be able to get 5 additional school sites open, at least, for the boards. In terms of the financial implications to this growth, we have been looking at the implications to the development charges, which are the town's mechanisms to raise the necessary funds to fund that infrastructure which supports the growth that you're looking at this evening. So the DC study does represent the benchmark which we use in terms of measuring that financial stability over the long term. When the DC study was completed in 2018, the town-wide review was roughly 21,000 housing units through 2030. The reason the bar is higher over at 2017, there was an expectation when the DC study was done that the allocation program we're dealing with right now would have started or at least rolled out in 2017. We would have had more opportunity to realize those dollars at that time. So the housing forecast then informs that capital infrastructure requirements, and that financing is then set out in the DC study. So according to the study, a total of $529 million is required for the growth-related infrastructure to support the 21,000 units, housing units, which are been identified townwide through 2031. The residential development that has been going on thus far has not advanced as quickly as had been anticipated in the DC study. So you'll see on this slide the actual between what was expected shown in the blue, and in the green it shows what has actually happened. So we had expected about just over 6,800 units townwide through 17, 18, and 19. What we've seen is just over 4,100 units built, which has resulted in a shortfall of $67 million. What this graph then illustrates is the proposed allocation around 7,100, 7,118 SDEs equates to about between 10 and 11,000 residential housing units, and depending on the mix of singles and towns and apartment units. So when we combine that with the projected growth in South Oakville, the number of units anticipated townwide would total approximately 20 to 21,000. So as you can see that right now, the way the DC study had anticipated, the number of units progressing, and it goes lower as you progress through the time frame. What the allocation will allow us to do is to get caught up around we'll start to ramp up through this year and then carry on. And then again, they meet up at the end of the forecast. So as I was noting, the DC study identified a total of $521 million to fund the infrastructure required to support the growth. Out of that $529 million, 61% is from development in North Oakville, and the balance, 39%, is from South Oakville. To date, the residential growth has occurred a lot slower than we had expected. As I mentioned, it's a $67 million shortfall that we have. And the majority of this shortfall is a result of less development that has been occurring in the south. If the regional allocation program proceeds as recommended, development in the north would continue to occur as planned, which in turn would generate approximately $230 to $250 million in DC revenue. And when combined with DCs collected to date, that would equate to about 90% of the total DC revenue from North Oakville. This then provides a greater level of assurance in DC cash flows over the forecast period and would allow staff to revisit the timing of a number of the growth-related projects in the upcoming 2021 capital budget. So if the allocation program is not approved at this time, if it's deferred or whatnot, the town would be 100% reliant on the DC revenue generated by development in the south, as the DC revenue anticipated for the north then would end up being deferred. So this could have a significant effect on the DC revenue cash flow in the interim period, and this could lead to further deferral of growth-related projects such as roads, bridges, parks, rec facilities, et cetera, as it would reduce the DC revenue available by $110 to $160 million. In terms of where we are now, just to summarize, the allocation program does continue to support the town's urban structure. It does ensure that servicing is available to accommodate planned growth and the continued availability of residential land. It meets council's intent to advance some of the higher density sites, as well as completion of neighborhoods, including the delivery of parks and school sites. The recommendation is there before you, and if you have any questions, I'm not solo tonight, we have some finance help as well.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. Councillor Elgar has a question for you.
Thanks very much for the presentation. It's appreciated. So everything we're doing here is to meet our forecast to 2031, correct?
Correct.
Understanding that there's going to be another supposed allocation in 2023 to help us get there?
That's our understanding, yes.
So what is our projection forecasted population at 2021? And where are we today?
In terms of the amount of population we have currently, is that North Oakville or?
No, Oakville. Schedule 3 is to the region. The region then took the population forecast and divvied it up to the different municipalities. So I'm just trying to figure out what are we shooting for right now to meet our forecast? What's the forecast? What is the forecast to 2031?
Through Mr. Mayor, I'd have to look at what the exact number is for 21. I know when we looked at North Oakville, the population that had been forecast was around 30,000 people, if I remember correctly, and we're around 18,000 right now from a population perspective for the north. I could look up to see what it is for the south right now, but I remember that was the number for north.
Because I guess I'm thinking we're going to, it's all about the people. It's not about pipe, it's about getting the forecast that we're supposed to meet, right? Is that what this is all really about?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this really is identifying where we are going to be putting, how we're going to be completing those communities. I mean, that's ultimately what it is.
To 2031.
Yes, and
So
as you can see.
when I look at the census back at 2016 that was done, we're sitting at 200,600 people. If you take a look at MPAC, we're sitting at 64,933 units, okay? Those are and that excludes, the units excludes apartments because there's no separate, issue there because they only have one tax bill. So even that, the number of units is a bit low. When I go forward 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, it shows our property count is 72,323 units. If you look at our 2016 people per unit, it's 3.09. Now, is it still 3.09 at this point?
If you can give me a second through, Mr. Mayor, I can take a look at what it's showing in the DC forecast.
Okay, because if it is 3.09, we're sitting at 223,000 people now in Oakville, in units that are being taxed. What's that? Okay, the mayor has just pointed out that it actually is 193,800, which is the population with undercount. And that's on page, I can show you the page from the Watson report. The population with without the undercut, with undercut, is 200,600. So if you flip through, you'll find it's on page 511 of the Watson report, if anybody's got it with them. I do. I can put it up if you'd like. The difference is with without the undercount, we're looking at 193,800, which is a 2.98 people per residence. But with the undercut, we're sitting at 200,600, according to the report that I've got, which is readily available. So if we're sitting, my question is, we're sitting now at 223,000 people. My question is, knowing that even one little item like Sawwet Golf Course was never part of any forecasted at all to 2031 in any reports anywhere. And if we know that we're going to have 1,181 units right now that will be built there. And also, after 7 years, there will be another 45 units because it's already in the agreement that if the school board has not bought the property in 7 years, then we're up at 1,226 units that will be built there. And that's already in process. So we're looking at roughly another 3,788 people right there. So if you add what we've got today and the other almost 4,000 people, and I look at what we're proposing, and that's without any applications that we've already approved that aren't fully developed yet, like I think the whole council should know what we're really forecasted to go to. Because I know I've asked a week ago for information, and I know it's going to take a while to get, but my question is, okay, how many applications has this council approved, and how many have actually gone through to be on the assessment roll? Like, what is the difference there? And I know it takes time to do that, but I appreciate, like, we shouldn't go into this blindly forward, because before we were going with 4,668 SDEs. That's what we had. That's what we were supposed to get in this allocation. And we've come in now with 9,118. So we're actually increasing our allocation of what we want by 52%. And I don't know how we can say we're controlling growth if we're jumping it from the 4668 to 7118, which is a 2,450%, 2,450 unit increase, which is 52%. It's huge. And I've looked at went through another report, and in fact, what they're saying is, right now, the people per units are higher than what they thought. Now, and that's coming from the region. So, like, I'm trying to understand this big rush, why we're not going back and taking a look at what we really need to meet our forecast.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what I can say is that we have the benefit right now of working with Halton Region in their integrated growth management strategy. And the numbers that we have right now is still, from the growth plan, we're still planning up to the 2031A number. So that was the 780,000 for the region. The exercise that we're working through with the region right now is to look to the 2041 numbers now, which is 1 million residents within Halton Region. And we do know that the province has told us that to sit tight because they're going to come out with a new numbers as well that we're going to have to look at. And I would expect, I think we're seeing that by June, somewhere in there. So we continually look at what is the uptake, where we are in terms of our projections. Are we behind? Are we ahead of them? And that's the benefit of the process that we're in, is we continue to be able to go back, analyze, reevaluate, reproject, refocus where population is going to be, how we're going to accommodate that population as well. That is the benefit to planning, is we're constantly looking at how we're adjusting for the population, because the markets change, our immigration changes, and we need to ensure that we're accommodating that.
See, and I hear what you're saying, but as far as what I heard tonight, we're still going to the 2031. Now, never mind whether the region's 780 or 820, which is the B allocation. Now, when that happened, we were told at the region that didn't need to be one more increase in one unit, because in fact what they're finding is the people per unit are increasing. And that was our head of our planning at the region. And then a lot of when we look at what was going on here, like I can go on for hours, but I won't, but because we'll probably get cut off. But when I think of where we want to go, I want to meet our forecast to 2031. And I know we're getting another allocation, and I'm not sure why we're jumping up so much when we really would be good to go the way we were going, which is our, roughly 4,600 allocation that we wanted to get. And then when I look at what the town staff said about Bill 108, it looks like Bill 108 may be good for us, but we don't know. But I can tell you one thing, the big push of the region to get this allocation, which a number of people, well, actually the majority of Oakville councillors didn't vote for, was that we had to do it because we were going to lose with Bill 108. But now if I look at on page on your report on page 10, or the bottom of page 14, looks like we need more information. We don't know where we're going yet with the DC charges. So at the appropriate time, I would like to refer this back to staff to come back with our forecast to 2031, if we could, Mayor Burton, to kind of get this sorted out so that everybody is on the same page going forward. When I look at it, I'm thinking, nothing's going to happen if we don't approve this tonight. Like, we got to come back with and also ask why we wouldn't be working with 4,668 units instead of the 7,118, so that we can meet our forecast, knowing that there's another allocation coming soon. And that also, if we're really serious about high density, why we wouldn't be putting the high density in first, so we don't have the problem as a council where always they put in the low density, the high density comes in and nobody wants it. So if we do what we're saying we're going to do, bring the high density in first and get it in there. And with the schools, I like how we said we're going to get schools. I look at Naigawa and Dundas, that high school, that was in 2006. That was, we're talking 14 years. There's still no high school there. There's still no budget for it. Sahuet will be an orphan. It will never have a school, and they've already got it worked out that there'll be another 45 dwelling units. So this is, to me, we're not quite ready for prime time here, and I will be actually asking for a referral back for those reasons. And I've got more, but I can write them out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions for Mr. Charles? Councillor Adams.
I'm going to go this way so I get picked up better. There's a couple of individuals who have written in to us with specific concerns. One of them is the Rampin property. I understand that there are concerns and issues there associated with...
Councillor?
Yes?
Your colleagues can't hear you.
Man!
And would you favor us with a motion to waive the procedure to go past 10:30?
Nope.
Would anyone? Councillor Lischenna, all those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to 6. The motion carries. Thank you. Counselor, please use a microphone so that your colleagues won't complain.
That's
about
what
not hearing.
that's what I'm trying to do. So there's the rampant property, which I understand that if it's not included currently in the recommendation, but if we were to proceed with the recommendation without it being in there, I understand that there's issues associated with how it gets, how the site gets developed, and whether vehicles would end up having to truck their way through a built area in order to do the grading and stuff like that. Is that true, and what can you tell me about that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't have the benefit of seeing what the grading plans are for the rampant property. What I can say was we did look with considerable amount of time at each and every single request that had come through. When we were looking at neighborhood 6, what we looked at was, can we get enough allocation onto the Mattamy site to get a 5th school site at the north end of that property. That therefore did not include being able to go to the rampant property as well. I fully acknowledge that the south end of that property was in or is in neighborhood 6, but we also know that it's going to take a little bit of time to get the infrastructure extended all the way up to that part of the area anyway, which in our mind would allow us then to look at that site with the next allocation program.
Okay, that's satisfactory. I think they might be here to delegate, so I'll wait for that.
Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, staff, for all of your work towards this report. I was hoping to see more in this report, staff's conversation with the school boards. I was able to connect with the Halton District Public School Board, not the Catholic Board. But what I learned, and what most of you already know, that unlocking 5 school sites isn't going to give us 5 new schools. Surely the pipes will be there, but only the funding from the province will give us the schools, and we've seen how much of that has come through in the last 4 years. We'll be lucky if we can get funding for another elementary school in the next 5 years. The capital priority list for the Halton District School Board, the first item is the high school, of course, which was submitted in 2015. So we're 5 years later, we don't have the high school, and they are hopeful that it will be approved soon, but we're still waiting for another 2 years for construction. So that's 7 years from when the ask was made. And the truth is, we need a new elementary school now because both of the schools are overcrowded. The school that is set to open in September of this year, it's not even open and it's overcrowded. So we need a new school now. So my question is, and you just answered a little bit of it now when you were answering Councillor Adams, is why didn't we look at partial allocation for neighborhood 6? Because that would strengthen our case in getting a school site, which they've put on their capital priorities. I'm just wondering, we don't really seem in sync with Halton District School Board. They've put in a request for funding for that site, but yet we didn't do partial allocation for something that could help us get that school. So any other conversations that you've had with the Halton School Board or even the province? I know we've done a lot of back and forth on this, but I think my council colleagues would also benefit from that. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The school site that we are looking at east of 8th Line is within the second phase of the Dun Oak subdivision. And we had some discussions with the school board as well as the region to see if there was a way to get that school site unlocked as part of the draft approval for phase 1 of the Dun Oak. Unfortunately, the way the grading is working in that area, we need a storm pond to the southeast, which is on Argo's DM site. So there is enough allocation to get us, I think, 95% of DM and all the way to the north end of that site, which will coincide with the adjacent property, which is the Bressa subdivision. So that gets us all the way up to the 5th school site, which is of interest to the Catholic Board at this point.
So you're saying that there will be one, we'll be unlocking the one Halton District School Board and one Catholic Board.
I'll just go backwards a little bit,
Yeah.
maybe on the map.
And just to comment on that as well, I mean, we have the Catholic school already in Ward 7. This is quite close by as well. And it was at under capacity for a long time. So you have the public school, because it's the demographic in the area, it's not Catholic kids. So, and their public elementary schools are not open to non-Catholic students. So we saw a huge issue in our ward where the Catholic school is empty and the public school is extremely overcrowded.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what I can offer is this site here, this is the Dun Oak school site that the public board is interested in doing. In order to get this one to go ahead, we need these properties in this area to equally advance. The site that you're mentioning right now that the Catholic board has interest in is right here, and they've said whichever is available first from a funding point of view, whether it's that site there or the more northerly flag up here, they would go with either site. They're very interested in both of those, and I think their preference is to the more northerly site at this point.
Okay, and so just lastly, have we talked to the province at all, or are most of our conversations through the school board?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, our conversations at this point is with the administration at the school board.
Thank you. That's all for now.
Councillor Sanju.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I apologize in advance, Mr. Charles. I have a plethora of questions for you. I'm on page 6, and we're looking at the dollar values associated with the DCs over the forecast period. So in that, you say that the 90% of total in North Oakville would be obtained. I guess my question is, I'm in the bottom bullet point just above background. For my clarity, are you saying that 90% of the revenues for all of the development charges would be complete for North Oakville? Because that's in contrast to what you're saying later in the report. Or are you saying that all of the DCs for that area would, or almost all of the DCs for that area would be unlocked with this?
I'm going to see, through you, Mr. Mayor, if my friends in finance want to answer that question more specifically,
Okay.
rather than me fumble with it.
Through you, Mayor Burton, I'm not sure if I've got the right page with the chart, but what the report says is that with the development that's already happened in North Oakville, the development charges collected to date, and what we would get through this allocation program, it would cover about 90% of the DCs that were planned to get from North Oakville.
Okay, so out of North Oakville
Out of North
specific?
Oakville,
Okay,
yes.
perfect. Thank you. That answers my question. And the next question, Mr. Charles, is on page 12 of the book. So I'm just going to tell you what page that is in the report. It's page 8 in the report. We're talking about several years for new communities to actually show. So people for people to actually be in homes, you're saying several years. Do we have an idea, just looking at the rest of the preserve, how long after we unlock this type of allocation it takes for people to actually be there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's difficult to say exactly what the average is because each site's a little bit different. It really depends on the amount of environmental infrastructure work that has to happen in order to get resolved and then to service the site and then to get towards registration. I would hazard a guess you're probably in about a 2 to 3 year time frame though.
Okay, so 2 to 3 years after they put shovels in the ground?
By the time that they initiate their application, once they know that they have their allocation, you're around 2 to 3 years or so, I'd say.
So I'm just trying to understand properly. So we're thinking about having people in homes by 2023, 24?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would suggest the developers probably want to do it quicker than that, but
Okay.
just understanding that there's an awful lot of coordination that has to happen amongst all of the landowners.
Okay.
In terms of synchronizing their various schedules in putting the pipes in the ground and servicing a lot of these sites. It could take a few years to get there.
Okay, and then just from the color chart you have up right now, you were saying that the yellow could be almost up to 98% allocation, and the green is full allocation. The 98%, is that in that chart that you provided to us with how we've gone back and kind of reduced some of the amounts that we've come back with?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that would be in the chart itself, I
Okay.
think is Appendix C.
C, I believe, yeah.
Yeah.
So while we're on Appendix C, what do we mean by low and high?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that was the reference I was making on the first slide, which is the standard SDEs versus the high-density SDEs.
Got it.
It's the payment schedule that the landowners are applying under.
Okay. So I'm gonna flip back a little bit. So we were talking a little bit about, or actually, I'm just gonna talk about the lag in services. So you mentioned the lag in services here. we're already talking about schools, we're talking about other facilities in the area. With the unlocking of this, does this in any way impact our BRT plans in the area? Because I know that that is something that we've been talking about for a very long time, and it seems to be very chicken and eggy. Like, we have to either have the people there for us to get in a BRT, or we have to have BRT there to actually ship the people that we already have. How does this play into that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, through OPA 321, we had recommended a minimum density along our corridors, along Dundas and Trafalgar. And the amendment as modified by the region removed those minimum densities. So that said, even though we took the figure out, we're still pushing the developers in that area to build at a higher density than they would have otherwise. And we are seeing that a little bit, especially along Trafalgar, in terms of the building forms that we're seeing. So you're quite right. Once you have the density there, it is an easier conversation to have with Metrolinx in terms of the timing of BRT. I need to go back and take a look at the RTP to see exactly what the timeframe was, but I don't remember that there was a timeframe for BRT along Dundas at this point. But there have certainly been recognition of the importance of Trafalgar as a future BRT.
Could we mark that as a takeaway for Councillor Parmar and I? I think that we both be very interested.
For sure.
In understanding that. I'm going to go to the next page in the report, so page 9 for you. We're talking about schools in general and the amount of schools. So we're seeing 5 total here. Does it matter if something's marked green versus yellow when it comes to the unlocking of a school site? Or is it about getting the pipes into place?
Through Mr. Mayor, no, it doesn't matter. What we were looking at in terms of that partial allocation was to give enough allocation to allow the grade-related design to work, to get the roads and the pipes in place so that we can service the school sites.
And I want to make sure I understand this correctly. Maybe this is a question for the school board, but if you can answer it for me, Mr. Charles. Without us having this, if we aren't able to service a school site, is the HTSB able to even apply for an additional school?
No.
Okay, so we have to have a location available and serviced, piped into sewage and water and whatever else, before they can even do anything.
Correct.
Okay. Out of this, and I'm going to draw it back to the corner of Neogawa and Dundas. So if we're thinking about the corner of Neogawa and Dundas, we know that it's been under application for a very, very long time. Do we know if any of these sites right now are in a contentious situation, like the corner of Neogawa and Dundas could potentially be seen as? And it's okay if you don't know the answer right now.
Through Mr. Mayor, none that are coming to mind at this point, but I may be corrected.
Okay. Another takeaway for us to maybe touch back on. And then I'm going to switch to Parkland. So just a confusion from my perspective. If we're looking at page 10 towards the bottom, it talks about the Parkland dedication would be subject to a maximum of 10% of the value under the draft regulation. Can you help me understand that a little bit better? I think what I'm struggling with is, does that mean that the Parkland allotment includes or precludes additional school sites, or is the Parkland just Parkland? And then there's an additional 30%-ish for Parkland use?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I was hoping I could just go back to the school board for a moment.
Sure.
Just to clarify on the Neogawa site, the high school site, there is no application on the high school site at this point in time. So your observation that you made earlier in terms of there has to be an approval of growth, there has to be the ability to be able to construct a school site for the school board to even begin to be successful in making application and getting funding. So in a large part, by opening up the 5 schools through this allocation program, which is our role in providing for the schools in the community, is to set the framework so they have the roads, they have the servicing, they have everything in place in order to be able to then ask the province for funding. We have no ability in terms of the funding and how that gets funded. Our role is to make sure the sites are available, and the allocation program would make those 5 sites available.
So CEO Closely, can I just ask another follow-up question to that? So when we're thinking about that corner on Neogawa and Dundas, am I understanding you correctly? There's no servicing happening on that corner right now?
No, there is servicing in place to be able to accommodate it.
Okay.
There is no application. You had asked if there was an application on the property.
I see.
An application still needs to be filed
Okay.
for that particular site,
I see.
for both a rezoning, it needs a rezoning application,
I see.
and then a site plan application.
I see. Okay, thank you for that. Sorry, going back to my parkland question, should I re-ask?
Please.
So if we're looking at the maximum of the 10% of the land value under the draft regulation is what you're saying for the parkland within the Northeast Secondary Plan, I guess my question is the parkland is a parkland allotment. That doesn't change if there's, like, the school locations or the school land doesn't add to or change the parkland allotment. I guess what I'm trying to understand is the additional 30%-ish that you're looking for in this parkland use is outside of that school property, correct?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, if I'm following correctly, in terms of the amount of parkland for North Oakville East, it's 64.5 hectares.
Got it.
That's it. That is our limit.
Okay.
That said, when we move forward in terms of doing a CBC strategy, North Oakville, we need to spend some time to understand how we're going to apply the CBC, if we apply a CBC, to North Oakville, because there's still a value to the parkland that has already been conveyed, as well as those lands which are to be conveyed still.
Got it. So we're talking about value here.
Yes.
The 10% is the value versus the space. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. You answered my question about DCs. My next question's on page 17. And that's page 13 of the report. Can you help me understand the impact of the 100 million to hard services? I think what I'm trying to understand is, if we don't collect these DCs, does that mean that these pieces of infrastructure crumble?
It means you don't build them.
You don't build
Yes.
a period. Got it. So even the stuff that's existing,
Pardon?
even the stuff that's existing that requires update?
Sure, go ahead.
Through you, Mayor Burton, development charges can only be used to fund infrastructure related to growth, so they can't be used to repair existing infrastructure.
Got it. Okay.
You could expand a facility because of growth, but you couldn't go in and repair infrastructure.
Okay, thank you, that makes sense to me, thank you. Can you answer that question for me too? And then just another question about additional allocation. So if we're thinking about in 2023, if we're gonna go down the path of another allocation, do we have numbers on what that would potentially look like for us?
No, we don't.
Not right now, okay. That's all I have for you, Mr. Charles. I just had a couple of comments. So I want to thank you so much for answering my questions. I live in the ward, and I feel like for me to make the best decision, we need to really be looking at precedent and what we've done in the community thus far and confirming with our professional staff. To me, I feel like none of this really that much of a surprise, except for the fact that we're trying to understand how unlocking works. And quite frankly, as a newer counselor, this is new to me. Ward 7 being home, I really feel like I can't abandon the ward and assume that development isn't coming or it's not staring us in the face. I don't feel like that's changing in any way, shape, or form. What I do feel like we need is additional facilities in the ward right now. I have a 7-year-old daughter, and I feel like a delay in bringing in additional DCs is going to delay her ability and impact her ability from enjoying the ward even longer. She could potentially be 15 by the time we see a rec center or we see any other additional schools if we wait even more. And running on that platform, I feel like we deserve that because we're taxpayers in Oakville just like everybody else. So I appreciate your report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor O'Meara, you're next.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Charles. Love the tie, by the way. Very, very spot on. Just have a couple of questions with regards to the numbers. I mean, we can get dragged down into the weeds with a whole bunch of data. And if you can maybe help me understand, so up to 2031 right now, we are planned to take 780,000 people in the region, or 820, whichever. We have a number that's planned. Is there a percentage that Oakville has agreed to take from the 2012 allocation or from this allocation? Is there a number or a percentage that we're striving to take as a part of the region of Halton and our mandate to take this number that the province has put before us?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think if I understand your question, there isn't a specific percentage on allocation that we are obligated to take. The region works its magic from a BPE perspective to translate based on the amount of greenfield that's there and the type of unit mix projecting out to a certain time period. What does that translate to from an infrastructure perspective? From a population perspective, we're obligated to take a certain percentage, and historically we've been in the 33-35%, I think, of the entire regional population.
Okay, so that still holds for the discussion we are now, is by 2031, we're taking a percentage of the BPEs that were planned out from 2006, and we're still on track to take that percentage based upon the BPEs by 2031, is that correct?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the population that the region identified through the BPEs, that number hasn't changed. So whether we hit that in 2028 or 2032, there's still the forecast of population that the town has planned to, and we've continued to plan for that number. What the exercise that we're going through right now with Halton Region with the IGMS is to then identify what is that next step into the 2041 timeframe, and then there'll be another step yet again after that.
So I got that, and not to confuse the 2031 to 2041, because that's not really what we're talking about right now. But it doesn't matter whether we take an extra 1,000 right now, or we take 400 less, or we take 2,000 now, because no matter what, we're still driving towards that destination that we will arrive at 2031. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that's correct. And that's the benefit of council having approved the urban structure and identifying the centers and the corridors, because those are those areas where we will continue to intensify as well.
Okay, so I want to be clear about the path that we're driving on to 2031. There's going to be some detours, some changes, some turns, but we're still heading towards that path. Regardless of how we get there, we're still going to end up at that destination right now, unless the province tells us differently. So my question is, are we leaving anything on the table by approving this tonight based upon the changes that were announced on Friday to Bill 108 from a DC and a revenue standpoint?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll have our treasurer assist me on this question, but what I can say is that we have planned to 2031 regardless. Our planning is in place. This area has been identified and designated for residential purposes. The benefit of doing the DC study is that we have a financial plan from a DC perspective as how we're going to get there. From a Bill 108 perspective and the draft regulation, it's better than I think we had anticipated. Is it perfect? Far from it. And that is why staff will be reporting back to council in the near future in commenting on or providing some opinion on Bill 108, since those comments are due back to the province at the end of this month.
Okay, and then lastly, are we at risk for libraries, community centers, and infrastructure if we kick this can further down the road of proceeding ahead with those projects?
So if I can just jump in there, yes, we are at risk. If we don't look at an allocation program at this point in time, we are already behind in our DC's collections by $67 million. If we continue to defer and push back when 69% of the DCs come out of North Oakville, we will collect less and less and have to look at our capital plan on an annual basis to push those programs out again. That's what we've done the last 2 years, is continually pushed out capital projects because we're not able to fund them based on the DCs that are coming in. So we are at risk. And I think more importantly too, just a simple request for the 4,000, which is that population in the 2023 timeframe, or the 22, I forget which it is not the question that the region's asked us. What the region has said, they've looked at their allocation program and what they can deliver, because they have infrastructure they have to provide for. They need a certain dollar figure in order to be able to move that out. The program that they've identified would require for the 13 or 14,000 SDEs throughout the region to be allocated. They know that in Milton, they don't have enough allocation, they don't have enough interest to be able to support all of that, or the 10,000 that was originally requested. They do have significant interest in Oakville. So they have put together a program that assumes that the 2031 population will be allocated in Oakville. If we say back to the region, We only want the 2022 population. There is no allocation program. That's my understanding from the region. So without that allocation, then the deferral of the ability to build capital projects is even further pushed out, because it means the region needs to go back and reassess that whole allocation program and come forward at a later date. I think the other thing that we've looked at in terms of the overall plan and the question about do we allocate to a 2031 population is, as Gabe has said, the build out for projects is, I would say, 3 to 5 years to actually get people in houses, in their homes. So when we talk about 2020, we're talking about 2023, 2025 before we actually have the population there on the ground. We also know that from just a planning perspective, there is a re-looking at the 2041 population. The province has already done that in Amendment 1, and they did make some changes to the 2031. We also know that they're looking at the populations right now. They made that announcement. I think there was a request for us to report on that. So the population requirements for the GTA at a provincial level are only increasing. So while we may hit our, potentially our 2031 a little bit early, by the time we get there, we will probably have a new set of numbers in order to plan for. So I'm not really sure we're adding a lot more to the population. And also, I think from a planning perspective, the ability to open up the school sites means that we have now enough of an allocation to be able to have the school sites. If you look at a smaller amount of allocation, it's then much more difficult to be opening up enough land in order to get those school sites. So from a planning perspective, the 2031, from a staff perspective, we saw as a benefit actually to us. And then when you look at the financial perspective, it actually allows us to have a little more certainty in terms of what we're getting on DCs, because that allocation program has been defined. We then can potentially look at our capital plan to bring in those community facilities hopefully earlier than what they are now. And the last point I wanted to make was Bill 108, if you had asked us the question on Thursday, what was the implication of Bill 108, our comment would have been Bill 108 is significantly impacting our ability to fund from all the things that we had heard. And in fact, we had, as I think most of you are aware, had worked with the developers to work on an agreement that would guarantee our DC previous regime moving forward. But the Bill 108, our initial assessment of it gives us back the 10% that we would have lost on our soft services, which is an excellent piece to move forward. The parkland piece, I think our early assessment is it may actually put us in a good position. Although there is an awful lot of work that has to be done in order to really give you a full understanding of what's the implication of Bill 108. And the reason that is we have to do a parks needs study to define what that 10%, the parkland dedication component is. We then have to translate that into all the other requirements. You see the long list of requirements that's in Bill 108. So if you're looking for staff to provide for you some full implications of Bill 108, that would take us 18 months to do. So it's quite a bit of time if that's the expectation for us to report back on that. So that's an awful lot to be said, but from a planning perspective, a financial perspective, from a staff, we were recommending that we could proceed with the allocation program without jeopardy to town. In fact, some benefits because of the capital planning.
Thank you, Madam CEO. That brings a lot of clarity to my thought process anyway. Thank you.
Councillor Palmer?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to speak to the question actually Councillor Sandhu had about shovels in the ground. And I know that in neighborhood 9, which is just east of 6th Line, south of Burns Grove, they're already building there. So is there a partial allocation there from the previous program, or do we give them some allocation while they're waiting? Can you just elaborate on that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, they were allocated through the 2012 program.
Okay. So there's also a school site in that area. So with the allocation in the 2012, is that site already unlocked, or that school wouldn't be able to go forward?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the school site is on an adjacent property, which is not did not receive allocation previously. They're part of this allocation program.
Okay. And then my question also, another one on schools is, actually I have two more. On schools is, so we're going to, because I'm just thinking about the comments that Councillor Algar made too, and going from the 4,000 to 7,000, and it, obviously we are going to grow in this area, it's inevitable, but I'm concerned with the amount that we're growing at. And it seems to me what we're doing is we are unlocking and providing growth in all of these areas to unlock the school sites, but in 2 to 5 years, or 3 to 5 years, or 5 to 6 years, we're not gonna have the 5 schools. So we're gonna be growing as if we can unlock these sites, but we're in actuality not going to have 5 school sites. We're gonna have an overcrowding problem for a long time until we get serious and really talk to the province about committing to building schools in these growth areas. And my other question is about transit traffic studies. I didn't see anything in the report about traffic studies or anything that we might have taken into consideration, or would that only be done at a later time in consideration to each application that comes forward?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there was the main transportation work which was done when the secondary plan was approved, and you then see that road network throughout the secondary plan, as well as the transit strategy that was done as part of the implementation for the secondary plan as well. The details of the transportation network then and where all those road connections go, that will come through the subdivision processes subsequently.
Okay, and so just to follow up to that, because we have the Trafalgar corridor, that whole transformation happening, and then we're gonna have all this construction at the Dundas and Trafalgar, so all of that was taken into consideration in the secondary planning? Like all the traffic that we currently have on Trafalgar, and now the construction that will also come to this area, because, I mean, we talked about it earlier with with the Hopedale development. It's the same situation on the north. It takes like 35 minutes to get down in peak traffic periods to the GO station on Trafalgar. So I'm just wondering, with all of the growth coming to that node, was that taken into consideration?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Dundas and Trafalgar have been identified in the region's plans for some time for widening and upgrade. They're both identified as rapid transit corridors, if I remember the terminology correctly. So they have gone through the EA process for those, and they are now currently going through the construction. North of Dundas, that is, Trafalgar is almost at 30% design, so they're going through that work currently.
Thank you.
Councillor Liszczyna?
I think there's a few more questions, but I'd like to move the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Sandu?
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Councillor Palmer just jogged a question in my mind. When we look at precedent in the past, any other times that we've ever had to kind of go through the same type of allocation, any other areas in North Oakville, like I'm even thinking back 20 years to River Oaks, have we been in similar situations like this before? Have we had a situation where we needed to unlock an area so that we could build a school there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The allocation program, I think, in previous years has been much different. The allocation program was usually occurring at the same time as development was happening. So the same type of kind of, I'll say, pent-up demand that's happened in the last couple of allocations is a bit unique. So that means that it's even more difficult for us to deliver those school sites through that program. So this is, I would say, a unique program, given that there is such a pent-up demand to move forward. And I think also there is a shift in the density, so you actually need a substantial number of units in order to be able to move, unlock enough land, because we are using land much more efficiently than we have in the past, which is very different from the way the development has occurred to the south.
Thank you.
Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Worship. First of all, thank you to Councillor Parmar and Councillor Sandu for taking all the really good questions. I do want to ask a point of clarification to something Mr. Charles said earlier, and that is with respect to there's no application for the Neagawa Dundas High School. When you say that, are you referring to the fact there's no town application, Or are you also saying there is no application to the province at this point for funding?
Through
Or
you, Mr. Mayor.
maybe the CAO mentioned that, I can't remember who said it. You all look alike.
We've had a number of discussions with the school board for that. They have held pre-consultation with us. We've gone through and looked at the design of the overall site. They just haven't made the actual Planning Act application with the town yet.
But are we aware that they've actually applied for the funds to the province? I understand that they have, but I just want to confirm that that's the fact. That's a fact.
I haven't heard from the board if they've done. I know they've been talking to the province though.
Oh, sure.
I'd understood that they had made that application.
Great, that'd be disappointing if I'd heard otherwise. So a comment that the CAO had made really piqued my interest, and that is the concept that we could potentially move up some of the capital projects in the Ward 7 area. And I'm talking particularly about the recreation center, which is currently, I think, 2028. Is that an actual opportunity if we were to achieve this level of funding, that we could move that particular project up? Because speaking of Councillor Sandhu's presentation, she talked about her daughter being 7. Right now, that means that her daughter's 15 when that library and recreation center opens, and probably not interested at that point. So what is, or maybe she is, what is the likelihood of actually being able to advance some of those projects?
Through you, Mayor Burton, it opens up the potential to move it forward. So right now, we've been managing our capital forecast based on the cash flows. If this allocation goes forward and there is pent-up demand for it, and the permits are pulled, it will increase the revenues coming in sooner than what would happen if we phase the allocations. So it opens up that potential to move it up. We would have to look at it as we go through our update of our capital forecast. But absolutely, if the revenue comes in, we would be looking at the timing.
That's a real opportunity right there. Thank you very much.
Councillor Haslett-Deal.
I don't know about anybody else, but I really wish we'd done this when we got an extra hour's worth of sleep. Okay. I have a bunch of questions. School population. So what is the projected, when you unlock a site, what population do they tell us you need in order to potentially consider opening a school?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a great question that I'm sure the school board could help us answer. At this point, I don't know how the amount of population they need that says that triggers their application to the province.
Okay, so maybe let me ask it a different way. What do we perceive because we're talking about we're saying there's 5 sites that could be unlocked here. And I think there's a bit of back and forth about how real is that number. When you say 5, you must be basing it on a population that you're projecting. What is that population for the schools that you're projecting?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, what we're looking at in terms of those individual school sites are the sites that are identified in our secondary plan, and those are then reflected again in the master plan. And those were identified back when the secondary plan was drafted in consultation with the school boards themselves in terms of what they saw as the overall need for schools as the North Oakville community was to develop.
Okay, I'm not even going to, we seriously do not know the number? Like, we do not know the number that they require in order to go ahead. We're talking about opening up and saying this, we're unlocking 5 schools, and yet we do not know a number that would make the government, provincial government, wake up and say, hey, we don't want to have a crisis in our elementary schools?
I would say, just as Mr. Charles has said, no, we don't have a number. And I don't know whether there's a number that the province even has, because if you think of the Odnawi School, they have, 13, 18 portables on that site? So I'm not sure if they had a number, that's the number that guides their funding strategy in any event. I think what we're looking at is the community in those areas is substantially built out that would accommodate the land in order to provide for that school. This, the location of those schools was what the school board had initially when we developed the North Oakville secondary plan, or the East plan. They had identified those as the needed schools they would need to serve the community. And so if the community around that school is built out, our assumption on our discussions with the school is that they would then have the population that would require them or make them make the funding request to the province. But what that number is that actually delivers the funding, we can't answer that because I personally don't think there is a set number for it.
Maybe I'm hearing it wrong, but I'm hearing that, this is an opportunity to unlock 5 schools, and yet it really is like taking a shot at the dark because we don't really have a number. So I hear that you don't have an answer to that, but that's unsettling to me because we know we can't trust them, and we know that the fact is that they haven't opened them up as fast before, and everybody's already acknowledging when a school opens, it's overpopulation. So it's a bit of a fool's game that we're going to do this, and we don't really know what the benefit will be in that part of the growth.
Mr. Mayor, I would also add that if we don't provide for the servicing for those schools, you won't get any schools. So it's
I hear you, but
one or the other. So what this does is creates an opportunity with enough people around those schools for the school boards to carry on with their part of it. So we've done and brought forward what we need to do in order to have the schools available.
Okay, I'll move off schools. So the number 4668, I don't know, Councillor Elgar, it was the original number we had committed to. And we have about a 2,500 increase to get to the 7,000 plus that this allocation would give. What is the financial difference between sticking with 4668 or whatever ballpark that is versus this allocation?
So we haven't actually looked at that for the reason I think I was trying to say was that the region has not given us an option of 48. They've given us an option of 71 in order to make the allocation program work. If the allocation program does not go forward with the number of units that they need in order to fund the infrastructure, then there is no allocation program to look at. So we actually didn't consider the 48 because when we looked at the option of moving to the 2031 population, we saw both planning benefits and financial benefits of moving to that state.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying the earlier number is not even on the table from the region's perspective.
That's
Correct.
Okay, and if we say no, there's no allocation program till 2023.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my understanding is that regional staff would have to go back to council, noting that they need to look at the numbers a different way and provide a different proposal to regional council.
Okay, and, okay, so I'm going to shift and move to a different area. In terms of the $67 million that we're behind, are we also in a deficit position with our DCs?
Through you, Mayor Burton, on our soft services, we are in a deficit when you look at the uncommitted balances.
Okay, so when there was a conversation about we could potentially move up, again, you're brilliant at the math. We have to make up the 67 million and a deficit of 35 million. Can you help me with how that gets us moving up faster?
So the 67 million is sort of the shortfall of what was planned in the DCs versus what we've got. We don't have a deficit of 67 million because we've been pushing projects out so that we wouldn't continue to grow that. Our parks and recreation, indoor, outdoor recreation is in a deficit because we did build some community centers ahead of time, knowing that by 2031, we would be made whole. So it's managing the cash flow to ensure that the overall balance of the development charges are positive. We always make sure of that. And we want to make sure we don't continue to grow that deficit because we don't want to get into a situation where we're borrowing a lot of money and then relying on development to pay those debt charges.
So really, we've got 35 million to make up, And then we would be in a position to possibly move some things forward.
Through you, Mayor Burton, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me of where our reserve balances are uncommitted. I don't think it's quite that way that we would want to build it right back up and then go. We would look at the cash flow over that period and see when we could move those projects up, when they would be within the timeline that we could afford.
Okay. In the report, there's comments about growth in the south not being a factor in this allocation because this is north allocation. So I'm not sure how to ask this question, but if Midtown comes along and somebody actually wakes up and realizes the benefit of having a road going over the QEW and helping the Trafalgar Transit Corridor and et cetera, along with getting more people into close to a GO station, if Midtown occurs, there's DC charges that come from it. Does that benefit, how does that benefit the neighborhoods to the south? Because what you're talking about now is benefiting to the north.
Through you, Mayor Burton, our development charges are town-wide, so they're collected and they're distributed on a town-wide basis.
Okay.
Part of the reason that we are in that one chart, it showed that the south is slower, is because of the delay in Midtown. So that has caused some of the shortfall that we're seeing. When we're looking at the allocation, we're looking at what was planned to be received from the north versus where we would be at with this allocation.
If I could just add to that, because the DCs are town-wide, it fulfills all of the DC charges that we would need. So if there's a project in the south that's moving forward that attracts DC money, because quite often it may not be considered a growth project, then it is equally available there to look at the increased dollars that are in the overall DC increase that we would get with, or the cash flow with this moving forward. So I'm just trying to clarify that it's not just the north that benefits, it's overall on the town, because we have more money coming into the DCs sooner.
And we've spent more money than we had coming in.
Yes.
Okay. Before we get to a vote, I would really like somebody to articulate what the benefits or risks, again, are of a deferral versus approving. I'm not sure who's going to do that, but I would like somebody to do that.
All right, well, before we do that, we have 2 registered delegations. I sense that council may have exhausted its questions for now. Oh, so shall we put the delegations off, or would you like to hear them first?
Well, my question would be fairly simple.
You have the floor.
Okay,
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Councillor Robertson is next, then you.
That's okay, I was just going to chime in on the school issue, and I don't need to, so.
Back to you, Councillor Elgar.
Thank you. I just, maybe Ms. Closey can correct me, but I thought I heard that right now, when Councillor Knoll mentioned about the high school at Naigaw and Dundas, that I heard it just needs a rezoning. Can they ask for a rezoning tomorrow?
I think, as Mr. Charles had said, they have actually been in with pre-consultation, just haven't filed an application. They could file that application at any time, and then it would go through the normal planning process that you deal with in terms of a public meeting and the eventual decision on the application.
So I really appreciate that, because I had always heard they couldn't do anything because it had the school overlaid on it at this point in time still.
So I was referring to the school site. So the school can make an application at any point in time.
Oh, okay, so not the
site
McGowans that
right
own
at
the property.
corner can always make an application. Anyone can file an application at any point in time.
So even though the school is on it, I thought they had been told. I'll defer to Ward 7 councillors and Councillor Knoll on that, but now I'm very confused. You're saying they could have done it back in 2008?
They could have made an application. I would think that their chances of success in 2008, freshly after the secondary plan was put in place, would probably be more difficult. But at this point in time, the school board has made quite a bit of progress, and I think has publicly said that they're looking at another site and part of the town lands in order to move forward with a school site, which would mean that the other site right at the corner would be free of that. So at this point in time, they could file an application for their particular site, and it would be reviewed in light of where the school board is.
Okay, that's good, because they've been, I think they feel they've been held hostage, I think, for like 15 years. On the issue of calculating Bill 108 and the implications, when I read the page 10, the second paragraph, staff has not had an opportunity to undertake a thorough review of the regulation. Did I hear you correctly when somebody said it would take 18 months to do the calculation?
Yes, when we're looking at the regulations and the requirements, we understand what are the immediate impacts of the DC by returning the 10%, no longer having the 10% discount. We understand that. The parkland component is a little more complicated because there needs to be a park study or parks needs study, first of all, to I will use the words justify what is your park requirements, to then translate that into what your percentages are. So there is a fair amount of work to do. We really need the regulations in place to understand exactly the next steps, but in looking at the requirements that we need to fulfill in order to understand what the implications of that are in a full way. I'm talking about a full assessment of what is the implications. It would take us 18 months to do that because we'd have to do the parks needs study first.
Now, with regard to development charges, I thought I heard somebody say that they're not in a good position. But in our 2020 budget allocation, it said development charges reserve funds are in a surplus position. Now, are they or are they not?
Through you, Mayor Burton, the development charges, I don't have the budget in front of me, the development charge funds overall are in a positive position. But when we look at the individual reserve funds, there are some that are negative, and those would be in the soft services. What the chart you may have, I'm not sure which one you're looking at, but the uncommitted balance, so because development charges are considered a deferred revenue, that means on an accounting perspective, you can only transfer the money out of the reserve and into the capital project once you've spent it. So we may have committed the funds against projects, but because they haven't been completed yet, we haven't been able to transfer the funds out of the reserve. So when I'm saying a negative balance in our soft services, I'm talking about the uncommitted balance.
So so we are in a surplus position.
Overall, yes.
Overall, I see. Now, when you say the DC charges are used town-wide, does that mean that the DC charges for North up in Ward 7 went to Southeast Oakville Community Center? Is that?
Through you, Mayor Burton, yes, they would.
Okay, so that's why they're so short. It went down there. We really need.
Some of it went down there, yes. 1/3 of that community center was funded from development charges.
33%. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, well, that's enough. I have my referral motion, and I'll wait. Thank you.
All righty. Councillor Chisholm? All right. Madam Clerk, would you call the registered delegations?
First delegation is Tom Baskerville from Rampant Holdings Incorporated.
Welcome, sir. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. In light of the hour, I'll be brief. My name is Tom Baskerville. I'm with Rampant Holdings, and we're here asking that we be included in the allocation program, requesting a partial allocation for our I have a, can you help me here? Asking for 70 SDEs. No. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yeah. Thank you. So our property is labeled as the subject lands. We're the only property in the area that wasn't recommended for inclusion in the allocation program. We understand that staff had a very difficult job and that there simply isn't enough allocation to go around, and that obviously there has to be winners and losers. But we just don't think that enough attention was paid to the phasing policies of the secondary plan. And sometimes that can lead to unintended consequences in future. This is, I'm sorry for the quality of this slide. This is the town's secondary plan phasing policy. It's important to note that the high-density uses along Trafalgar and Dundas and so on have their own priorities. We're talking about the low-rise residential neighborhoods here that were talked about somewhat earlier. Most of Phase 1, neighborhoods 1 through 4, has largely been built out. There's some remaining that's recommended for allocation here. So really what we're talking about in terms of discretionary allocation is within Phase 2 of Northeast Oakville. And what this policy tells us is that within Phase 2, neighborhoods 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, priority shall be given to neighborhoods 6 and 8. So neighborhood 8 is largely built out. There's a small portion that's been recommended for inclusion. But neighborhood 6 then would be the remaining priority neighborhood. And I'll just, before I leave, I'll note that it uses the word shall. And it's important to understand in the language of official plans and secondary plans that shall means must. It's not encouraged. It's not maybe. It means it will be. This is the figure from your secondary plan that shows where these neighborhoods are located and where the limits of them are. I'm not sure if this will work for me. So, a little jumpy. So the southern portion of our property is in neighborhood 6, and the northern part is in neighborhood 7. But in actuality, the northern part of ours is the Joshua Creek Arts Center, which many of you would be familiar with. And you may know that we recently worked with the Town of Oakville's Heritage Committee and this council to designate that property as a cultural heritage landscape, meaning that that property will never develop and the Arts Center will continue. So when we're looking for a allocation here, we're really talking about for the southerly lands, which are part of neighborhood 6. I think it's important to note that the staff report that you're looking at in Appendix C labels our land as neighborhood 7. And I wanted to point out that that's a mistake and it's factually wrong. So I can't help but wonder if that helped to lead to the conclusion that it wasn't important to include these lands. This is our attempt to try to show where the neighborhoods are relative to what's been proposed to be receiving allocation. And what's important to note here is that neighborhoods 9, 10, and 11, for instance, are proposed to receive allocation. And I know it's to do with potentially unlocking these school sites. But as been said here, providing a school site means nothing if there isn't the population to generate the funding of an actual school. And I think a better approach would be to focus on completing fewer neighborhoods where you can get the right amount of population and see the school actually built and the neighborhoods completed. We're asking not for the 160 SDEs that we originally applied for. That would be the amount we need to complete our project. We're asking for 70. And that's because of a policy within the regional framework that says that if we have 40% of the allocation that we need, we can apply for draft plan approval, or work our plans through the system, and so on. So that's important for us. Right now, the Diem Argo property, they applied in December for draft plan approval. Mattamy is taking their draft plan adjacent to ours to a public meeting later this month. And we need to be at the table. We don't want all these other plans around us where the big companies get approved and we're sitting waiting in the wings. It's also important when it comes to being able to implement the draft plans. After we get draft plan approval, we can apply for grading approvals. If we're able to move ahead at the time that Mattamy and others go, we can do it with off-road trucks. There's no residents to worry about. But if we're forced to wait to some future allocation process, and by the time we then get through an approval, we'd be looking at grading and servicing through existing communities, occupied homes, and schools. So staff will correctly point out that not everything in the yellow area is actually going to develop. These drawings are sort of consistent with how the region approached it, where they show an entirety of an ownership and it's either red, green, or yellow. And we understand that. And as I said, we're just looking to be yellow as well so that we can work through the planning process at the same time that the other neighbors do. And we have a disadvantage too, being a small company. We don't have the ability to move allocation around between projects or between even municipalities, as the big companies will do and have done. So it's important for us to be able to get allocation for this property. We're ready to move forward with our applications, and we can work alongside the town and the other developers to plan the neighborhood in a comprehensive way. Of the over 7,000 SDEs available, we only need 70. It'd be a rounding error to some of the allocations that have been given. And I'm sure that staff would be able to defend their report. There's any number of ways they could have looked at this. But I also know that if it was the will of council to see us be able to participate, it would be very little difficulty for them to adjust the allocations proposed and include our property. So I'm asking council to direct staff to include a partial allocation for the ramp and lands. Thank you, and I could answer any questions.
Are there questions for the gentleman? Thank you, sir. Madam Clerk, the next councillor has a question, perhaps.
What kind of buildings do you want to put on the property? Like what, will it be single detached? Will it be townhouses? What will it be?
So the secondary plan for our area calls for a mixed low-rise subdivision. So it would be a combination of singles, semis, and townhouses. That's what's been slated for this area, so that's what we'd be looking to put in.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Adams?
Would you mind going back and putting up the map that you had that kind of shows your property? And did you have one that shows any of the street design on your property or not?
No, we've been working through that process. In the last years, we've done all of the environmental work. We're into engineering studies and so on. But we recently have been modifying our proposed draft plan concepts to marry up with the latest versions of the Mattamy plans to the east of us. So I don't have anything here tonight that I could show you.
And you had originally asked for more SDEs than just 70.
Yes, it requires 160 SDEs to support about 195 units.
So that's to cover the whole red box there?
That's correct.
And the 70, what part of that box does it cover?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the development is going to occur from the south northerly. So it'll be the southern portion of the plan that would actually get implemented.
And so you'd be trying to match into whatever road network gets created by the adjacent plan.
Right, and that's why we would like to have status to be at the table for approval at the same time, so that we don't get stuck with something that's largely, disadvantaged to us in a difficult geographic area. We've got a woodlot to the south that creates, some challenges for us there.
Yeah, thank you very much for attending. I appreciate the conversation as well.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Madam CAO, would this request qualify for the region's, I'll call it, enabling supply of 1,500 extra SDEs or not?
Our inclination is that it would not apply to that. I think the enabling is if there is an opportunity to go back to the schools, to open up a school site, to add a few more units around a school, those are the kinds of things I think the region was talking about on the enabling piece. So I don't see this one as fitting that.
Okay, and did you want to explain why you didn't include it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I had alluded to, I think a little bit earlier in my comments, when we took a look at this one, noting that the southerly part was within neighborhood 6, was could we get enough allocation onto the Mattamy site to get us up to the school site? And what we had looked at in terms of the break between neighborhood 6 and 7 was actually, and I appreciate Mr. Baskerville actually brought this concept, because we had actually looked at it roughly around this road would be the limit of the full allocation that Mattamy would get through this program as recommended. So it got us that far north, was to at least get to that school site. Knowing that as we go through the review of the subdivision for Mattamy, there's an opportunity to work on the technical reports on the Rampant site as well, so that we're not delaying that site when they were to get, or if they are to get allocation as part of the next program. Knowing also that it's going to take some time to get the servicing up to this neighborhood, by which time our anticipation is that the next allocation program would be ready and there would be a better coordination of moving the dirt around.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
Jerry Tischler from MHBC Planning.
Welcome, sir. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. My name is Jerry Chisler, and I'm an associate with MHBC Planning. We've been retained by the owners of 1005 Dundas Street East and 3033 8th Line. We submitted a letter earlier this morning, and basically through the clerk's office to the council, and I just want to outline some of the key points that I made in my letter and allow for the opportunity to answer any questions that you may have. So as a bit of background, in November of 2019, we submitted a zoning bylaw amendment application for the properties. They're abutting properties there in the corner of 8th Line and Dundas Street East. So we submitted a zoning bylaw amendment application to facilitate a 562-unit condominium apartment complex. And that went to council as an information item back in January of 2020, and we're still waiting a full set of staff comments on that application. And as an additional piece of background, so we are located in the Dundas urban core area of the North Oakville East secondary plan. The previous owners of the property actually did submit also a zoning bylaw amendment application back in 2016. It was approved in 2018. That was for a 255-unit development proposal. It was an 8-story building. It included some townhouses as well. And that proposal at the time essentially implemented the North Oakville East secondary plan policies that were applicable at that time, some of which included the 8-story height limit. It included a 2.5 FSI density. So in July of 2019, the LPAT approved a OPA 321, which was a town-initiated OPA that essentially brings the secondary plan in line with the Livable Oakville plan, and included some changes for the Dundas urban core area. And some of those changes included removing the density limits, the 2.5 FSI density limit, as well as allowing for an increase in building height. So up to an additional 4 stories on top of the 8 could be permitted through section 37. And what this OPA really did is it recognized the town's direction in terms of the urban structure to direct growth into the nodes and corridors. And it also recognized the fact that the site is located on a rapid transit corridor, which has been identified in Metrolinx's regional transportation plan. So that's just a bit of background in terms of why this revised proposal, the 562-unit proposal, was prepared and submitted to the town. And it was in response to this policy shift. So in conjunction with that, in December of 2019, we'd applied for the 252 SDEs to implement that very proposal. And the staff report before you today only recommends 126 SDEs, so that's about half of the request that we had submitted. And so we here are requesting that council reconsider that recommendation and endorse the full 252 SDE request. And just as a bit of context, the 106 SDEs that are recommended for being approval represents about 280 dwelling units, apartment dwelling units, a little bit less if you include the townhouses, which essentially represents the proposal that was contemplated before OPA 321 was approved. And so we are asking for the full 252 SDEs to be approved, and to be consistent with that the vision and direction that was provided in the council-approved OPA 321, which contemplated additional density, focusing growth in the urban nodes and corridors, being the Dundas urban core, and recognizing its importance in the urban hierarchy. So the site itself is ideally located for intensification. It's at the intersection of two major streets, a collector and a major arterial. It's on a rapid transit corridor. It's in proximity to public facilities, commercial uses, some employment uses down the road to the east. And intensification areas like this along major corridors, along planned frequent transit are designated as strategic growth areas in the provincial policy. It's also a strategic growth area in the Livable Oakville plan. So we're of the opinion that we need to ensure that the full allocation amount is provided to such properties to ensure that this kind of vision is realized and that we're able to realize such things as rapid transit in the future. And last, I just want to mention that the full allocation amount would allow for an efficient construction of the proposal, so it would eliminate the possibility of having to wait for a future allocation program, whether it's 23 or later. And it certainly would provide certainty to some of the owners as well as the neighbors with respect to the timing of that construction. And actually, last, I just wanted to add that this additional density that we are requesting through the zoning bylaw amendment application, it is coming through Section 37, so we're still in a position where those bylaws can be passed. But the fact that that is occurring would allow some of those additional community benefits that council finds lacking in North Oakville East Secondary Plan to be potentially realized or at least funded additionally. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your information. Are there questions for the gentleman? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Madam CAO, can you give council any explanation for your decision or your recommendation with respect to this?
I think Gabe Charles can address that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When we took a look at this particular proposal, we were looking at the phasing that had come along or had been proposed as part of the application. And it's split fairly evenly in two phases, and the first phase and the second phase both having 281 units. The first phase was anticipated, according to the applicant, to commence in around March of 2022, giving roughly a 2-year time frame for these types of constructions. Our anticipation would be that by the time the next allocation program rolls around, that the second phase of this development would be ready for allocation. So it's not to say that we would only review half of the site from a site plan perspective. We would look at the site comprehensively, and it just means that one permit would be issued for the first phase, and they would need a subsequent permit to get into the second phase somewhere once the next program is in place.
Thank you very much. I think that completes the delegations. Are there any other members of the public with information for council on this matter? I'm going to restrict it to table. So I'm going to recognize Councillor Lischina's motion and Councillor Elgar's motion to refer. A motion to refer needs something to refer, so we get the recommendation on the table, and the matter in front of us now is Councillor Elgar's motion to refer. And the rules on motions to refer is that they're debatable with respect to the merits of referring the matter, to whom the matter is to be referred, and any time period within which the matter is to be reported back. Councillor Elgar, you have the floor.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton, I'd like to start off by saying I'd like to refer this back to staff to provide the forecast of population to 2031 based on what the current population is today, based on best planning estimates, plus the number of units already approved but not yet included in the property count. And that direct staff provide allocation, mixed low-rise Rampion property, I shouldn't say requirements, but considerations in this allocation when it comes back to us. We got to ensure that we do meet the 2031 population forecast, and I just want to make sure we do it in a proper manner, because we still have another supposed potential allocation coming to us in 2023. And I believe that if we take our time and do this properly, we will actually control growth. instead of on bridle growth by increasing it from what we had previously projected. We're increasing it by 52%. That would be the simple part of my recommendation at this point. And as far as the timeline, I would defer and ask staff how long it would take them to come back with that information. I would think it shouldn't take very long, what I'm asking for.
Madam CAO.
So if I understand the request, and then the one I wanted to just inquire on was,
Well, let me, procedurally, a time to be referred back is not required, and if
Okay.
you don't specify one, then staff will bring it when they're ready.
And I'm fine with that. That's fine.
Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you. Well, just speaking to the motion to referral again, I'm not really sure how the results of what staff are going to have to say about what our current population is and where we're going to go is going to impact where we're going to end up in 2031. I don't see how that information is going to have any impact at all other than to kick the can down the road and possibly really mess up with our DCs and then potentially have to go back to the region and have to redo an entire allocation conversation because now we have to go back and tell them that, you know, there's not enough here and we need to blow the whole thing up and start again. So I won't be supporting the motion to refer for those reasons. I don't think it gives us anything else that helps us get to the destination we've already agreed to and the province has told us to get to. So I won't be supporting the motion.
Can I put the vote to refer? All those, may I or not?
Can I ask staff a clarification question?
As long as it's only to do with referral.
I think it has merit, and I'll try it.
If it has to do with referral, it has merit and it's in order.
I have a question about the Rampin property and the number of units that are allocated to the Argo property and to the Mattamy property, and to what degree we are able to control where those units get built.
Councillor, that's not germane to referral.
Well, then-
If referral fails, that would be a question that would be in order.
Well, then I call the question.
Councillor Hazat-Deal on referral.
So, what I'm understanding is that if we're referring it back, we don't have a time frame in which we would get it back. So we're not, so for example, if the referral said to report back that information in 1 month, what I'd like staff to answer is 1 month doable? And what do you see as potential, clarifying that information, how do you see that benefiting us?
so in terms of reporting back, if I understand the request enough, I think that we could report back fairly quickly. In fact, we would try and report back to the next council meeting on March 23rd. The reason for that, it would still allow us to be able to inform the region in the time frame that they were looking for. So for that reason, we'd look to getting back in that period of time. In terms of whether or not it would change the information or shed any more light on it, we had considered the 2031 population. What was the implication of allocating to that? And the conclusion from staff's perspective was there was both good planning merits to doing it and good financial merits. So from staff's perspective on the recommendation, we wouldn't see the information changing in any way the recommendation.
Councillor Grant.
So what I've read and from what I've heard tonight, we are essentially kind of making sure that things are getting set for the future. We've always sorry, the late hour.
Councillor,
we've already got.
You can only speak to referral.
Speaking to the referral, I think that it's not proper because of the fact that we know that there is going to be concerns if we do try and refer this. And we're putting some possibilities in place that we would not have areas for people to grow into as it grows. And I mean, Councillor Sandhu had mentioned at one point about how
You're wandering.
my mind wanders. Let me get to call the question in.
All right, to vote in favor of referral, please rise to be named. Councillor Duddick, Councillor Hazlet-Deal, Councillor Elgar, Councillor Adams, Councillor Palmer, to vote against referral, please rise to be named. Councillor O'Meara, Councillor Robertson, Councillor Chisholm, Councillor Longo, Councillor Knoll, Councillor Grant, Councillor Lischina, Councillor Sanju, and Mayor Burton. Referral has failed. Councillor Adams, you had a question about you had a question about the rampons, and that goes to Councillor Lischina's motion. You have the floor.
Can staff tell me to what degree we have certainty that any units that are allocated to the Mattamy lands and the Argo lands must be used in a way that would A, open up the school sites, B, match up to the rampant property, and C, couldn't be taken out of those properties and moved to another, say, Mattamy property elsewhere?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. When we look at these subdivisions, they are looked at comprehensively. They have to all work together, and that's not just from a road connectivity point of view, but also from a stormwater perspective, et cetera. The idea of moving allocation around is subject to the approval from the planning director. So with something like this, we wouldn't suggest that Mattamy, for example, would be able to move allocation off of this site, which would then further impede the rampant property from being able to proceed. So we would take that into consideration to make sure that the rampant property is in a good position for the next program.
And I have another, one other higher level question, which is, why were we only offered one option in the recommendation? Why were there not consideration given to having multiple options for council to choose from?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, clarify options for which?
So there's X number of allocation units to be spread around, and staff have come with a single option. Here's our recommendation. It's this or nothing. And there was no options around what if you wanted to prioritize more of the high density? What if you wanted to prioritize more of a particular zone or area for a particular reason?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what we looked at was the evaluation criteria which we presented, not to suggest that any one of those criteria had more weight than another, that they didn't have priority over another, and it was how many boxes can we check to meet as many of the criteria as possible with the distribution that we were looking at.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think this may have been something that Councillor Auger touched on, but my question is, before we jump from the 4,100 to the 7,100, where did the 4,100, I'm not sure if staff worked on this, but where did the 4,100 SDEs take us in regards to our target for the 2031 population?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so I think the number you're referring to is the 2022 BPE forecast that they were looking at, which equated to 4,668 or so SDEs. So that just took us to the 2022 timeframe, which was the original timeframe for this particular program.
This program was delayed 4 years.
Right. Okay, so, but, I mean, I have some other information from $46.68. We asked for an increase at the region to $71.18. My understanding is we did that so we could take advantage of the DCs before the new information came out. So I want to know if we had stuck with the 46.68, what type of population, like where would that get us to 2031? Because, I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it did increase at the regional level, right?
What the region gave the town to comment on was the allocation of the 7188 units. The allocation program didn't consider the 4668, that number, because it wasn't factored in terms, they were looking at a program that they could deliver all the infrastructure. That required the 7188. So we didn't look at the 46.
Okay,
it just
thank you.
wasn't on the
That
table
number
for us
was
to
given
consider.
to me by our staff, so I thought that maybe it would have been under consideration as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you. May I put the vote? Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
Question for staff, because one of the delegates made an excellent point about how the coordination and the efficiency of basically the build-out. When the allocation was looked at, I didn't see a criteria that talked to how, to that element in terms of ensuring that the neighborhoods, that either the pace in which it's going to occur, or that it's going to minimize as much disruption as possible. Was that a factor at all in just putting a lens on the allocation? So you created areas where you said, look, this is now going to unlock a school, but is there anything around the context of, okay, we're going to be building in this area and this is how it's going to phase in?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, not to the degree I think that you're suggesting in terms of how the actual development will phase. That would be something that we would get into that level of detail through the subdivision process.
It's just, when you look at the Appendix C and you see how the assessment was to reduce the amount of allocation, sharing it out is, and again, you're the experts and I'm sure that you thought it through, but that reduction means there's a whole bunch of projects that are only going to get partway through, not all the way through. Or have I misunderstood that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what we've looked at is trying to allocate as much as possible under the standard SDE, which allows for the grade-related to proceed, which means we get the roads, the pipes, the land available for the school sites. And where we pulled back was on the higher density SDE requirements. So that means rather than being able to do 2 buildings on a block, a developer could do 1 building, for example. So that's where we started to pull back, was on those types of, what was within that payment pool.
Okay, thank you.
Any others? Then I'll call the vote. All those in favor? All right. If to be recorded in favor of the motion, please rise to be named. Councillor O'Meara, Councillor Robertson, Councillor Chisholm, Councillor Haslett-Deal, Councillor Longo, Councillor Knoll, Councillor Grant, Councillor Lischina, Councillor Sanju, and Mayor Burton. To be recorded against, please rise to be named. Councillor Duddick, Councillor Elgar, Councillor Adams, and Councillor Palmer. The motion carries. Thank you. We need a we need a motion. Do you need this motion here? Okay. All right, we need a motion to rise and report to council. Yeah, that's all part of C1. I saw a hand for the rise and report. Councillor Duddick, all those in favor? That carries. Our rise and report, the Committee of the Whole has met and has made recommendations on consent items 1 and 2, public hearing items 3, 4, and 5, discussion items 6 and 7, and confidential discussion items C1, as noted by the clerk. Are there a mover and seconder for this report? Councillor Lischina, Councillor Knoll, all in favor? The report is adopted. Is there any new business of an emergency, congratulatory, or condolence nature? Is there a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws? Councillor Grant and Councillor Longo, all those in favor? The bylaws are confirmed. That completes the work before us. Thank you very much for your contributions and your many fine questions. It's been terrific working with you, and we are adjourned.